The moment I heard another man's name escape my wife's lips during what should have been our most intimate moment, I knew my marriage was over. But what I discovered next about the elaborate web of lies surrounding me would make that betrayal seem like a gentle whisper compared to the hurricane of deception that was about to unfold. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I should have known something was wrong when Rachel started, insisting we needed couples therapy. After 8 years together and 5 years of marriage, she suddenly claimed we were growing apart and needed professional help to reconnect spiritually and physically. Looking back now, I realize it was never about saving our marriage. It was about buying herself time and cover while she systematically dismantled everything we had built together. The name she whispered that night was David, not Mike, not honey, or baby, or any of the endearments that had peppered our relationship for nearly a decade. David. She said it so naturally, so breathlessly, as if she had been practicing it for months. The way it rolled off her tongue suggested a familiarity that made my stomach drop to the floor. I lay there in the darkness afterward, listening to her peaceful breathing, while my mind raced through every interaction, every late night at the gallery, every yoga class she claimed was helping her find inner peace. Rachel had always been passionate about art and wellness, but lately, her dedication to both had intensified to an almost obsessive degree. She would disappear for hours at a time, claiming she needed to center herself or help with special exhibitions that somehow always seemed to require her presence during odd hours. The next morning, I watched her carefully as she moved through our kitchen, preparing her usual green smoothie with the organic ingredients she insisted on buying from the expensive market downtown. She hummed softly to herself, completely oblivious to the bomb she had detonated in our bedroom just hours earlier. Her phone buzzed constantly on the counter, and each time it did, she would glance at it with a slight smile that I had never seen directed toward any message from me. "Who keeps texting you so early?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual as I poured coffee from the machine she had insisted we upgrade last month. Everything in our house had been getting upgraded lately, from the meditation corner she created in our spare room to the expensive yoga equipment that now dominated half our garage. "Oh, just Jessica planning some gallery event," she replied without missing a beat, but I noticed she positioned herself so the phone screen was angled away from me. You know how she gets when she's organizing something. Wants every detail perfect. Jessica Martinez had been Rachel's best friend since college, and I had always found their relationship slightly intense. They spoke multiple times a day, shared clothes, and seemed to have an endless stream of activities that required them to spend time together without their respective partners. Jessica was single, had been for as long as I had known her, and often made comments about how lucky Rachel was to have found someone so stable and reliable. The way she said it always made those qualities sound like character flaws rather than virtues. I had built Thompson & Associates from nothing, starting with freelance marketing projects in our tiny first apartment and growing it into a respected firm with 12 employees and clients throughout the Pacific Northwest. Rachel had been there, from the beginning, helping with everything from logo design to client presentations. She had an eye for visual aesthetics that complemented my strategic thinking perfectly. We were supposed to be partners in every sense of the word, but as I drove to work that morning through Portland's familiar streets, I found myself questioning every recent memory. The late nights when she claimed she was working on a new exhibition. The weekend workshops that seemed to multiply every month. The sudden interest in meditation and mindfulness that had transformed our once lively, spontaneous wife into someone who spoke in measured tones about energy and alignment. My office was located in a converted warehouse in the Pearl District, not far from the gallery where Rachel worked as a curator. We used to meet for lunch regularly, walking to the food trucks or one of the trendy cafes that had sprouted up around the area. But those lunch dates had become increasingly rare over the past 6 months. She was always too busy, too focused, on some urgent project that couldn't wait. Patricia Williams called me just before noon. She was the attorney who had helped us set up the business structure for Thompson & Associates, and she had become something of a mentor over the years. Her calls usually meant either good news about a legal matter or advice about business expansion, so I answered with genuine enthusiasm. "Mike, I hope you don't mind me calling directly, but I wanted to give you a heads up about something," she said, her usually warm voice carrying an edge of concern. "I was having lunch with a colleague yesterday, and your wife's name came up in a conversation about property transfers. Are you and Rachel looking at real estate investments I should know about?" My hand tightened around the phone. "No, we haven't discussed any property transfers." What kind of conversation? There was a pause that seemed to stretch forever. My colleague mentioned seeing Rachel's name on some documentation related to a yoga studio purchase in Hawthorne. The buyer was listed as David Chen, but there were additional names on the paperwork. I probably shouldn't have mentioned it, but I thought you might want to know. David Chen. The same David whose name had escaped my wife's lips in our bedroom. The pieces began clicking together with a clarity that made me feel physically ill. The yoga classes, the meditation obsession, the sudden interest in Eastern philosophy and mindfulness practices that had never appealed to her before. "Patricia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. If someone were planning to hide assets or make financial moves without their spouse's knowledge, what would that look like?" The silence on the other end told me everything. I needed to know before she even spoke. "Mike, I think you and I need to have a conversation. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" I spent the rest of the day in a haze, mechanically going through client meetings and project reviews, while my mind churned through the implications of what I had learned. Rachel wasn't just having an affair. She was building a life with someone else, using our money, our resources, our shared dreams as the foundation for her escape plan. When I arrived home that evening, Rachel was in the kitchen preparing dinner with unusual enthusiasm. She had changed into one of the flowing dresses she had started wearing recently. Clothes that seemed designed to showcase her newly flexible body and spiritual awakening. The scent of incense drifted from the living room, where she had arranged cushions and crystals in what she called her sacred space. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, turning to give me a smile that might have seemed genuine if I hadn't spent the afternoon learning about property transfers and business partnerships I knew nothing about. "Interesting," I replied, settling into one of the bar stools at our kitchen island. "Patricia Williams called me today. Apparently there's some confusion about property investments involving your name." I watched her face carefully, looking for any tell, any flicker of recognition or panic. What I saw was worse than guilt. It was preparation. She had been expecting this conversation, rehearsing for it. Her expression shifted into what I now recognized as her therapeutic voice, the one she had started using during our couples counseling sessions. "Oh, that," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "David needed help with some paperwork for his studio expansion. You know how complicated business documents can be. I just helped him navigate the legal requirements since you've taught me so much about business structures over the years." David. She said his name so casually, as if he were just another friend, another colleague whose existence in our lives was perfectly natural and transparent. But the way she said it carried the same intimate familiarity I had heard in our bedroom the night before. "David Chen," I said, making it a statement rather than a question. "Your yoga instructor." "He's become a good friend," she replied, turning back to the stove with practiced nonchalance. "He's been incredibly helpful during this difficult period in our marriage. Sometimes it helps to have an objective perspective from someone who understands spiritual growth." The audacity of it took my breath away. She was standing in our kitchen, preparing dinner with groceries bought with money from our joint account, talking about her affair partner as if he were a therapist or life coach. The elaborate justification, the spiritual language, the complete reframing of adultery as personal growth. It was masterful in its shamelessness. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Hey Mike, hope you're doing well. Rachel mentioned you guys might be getting away for a weekend soon. That's so great. You both deserve some quality time together." I stared at the message, realizing that Jessica wasn't just Rachel's best friend and confidant. She was an active participant in whatever elaborate story Rachel had constructed to justify her behavior. The weekend getaway Jessica referenced had never been discussed between Rachel and me, but apparently it was part of some narrative that made Rachel's actions seem reasonable to their social circle. "Jessica texted me about a weekend trip we're apparently planning," I said, holding up my phone. "Want to fill me in on the details?" Rachel's stirring motion became slightly more aggressive. "I mentioned to her that we should probably plan something romantic, given what Dr. Roberts has been saying about the importance of quality time. I haven't booked anything yet. I wanted to see when you'd be free. Dr. James Roberts was the couples therapist Rachel had insisted we start seeing 3 months ago. A soft-spoken man in his 50s who specialized in communication and intimacy issues. He had been encouraging us to explore what he called individual growth within the partnership. At the time, I had thought his approach was helping Rachel become more confident and self-assured. Now I wondered if he had been unknowingly providing therapeutic cover for her affair. That night, after Rachel fell asleep, I carefully extracted myself from our bed and made my way to the home office we shared. Her laptop was password protected, but I knew her patterns well enough to guess correctly on the third try. Her birth date, combined with our anniversary year. The same combination she used for everything from her phone to our shared credit card PIN. What I found in her email and text message history was a completely different version of our marriage, our relationship, and our future. Months of correspondence with David about their plans for the yoga studio, their spiritual connection, and their shared vision of a life free from what Rachel described as conventional limitations and expectations. But it was the messages with Jessica that truly opened my eyes to the scope of the deception. They weren't just talking about covering for Rachel's affair. They were planning my systematic replacement in every aspect of her life. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Jessica had been helping Rachel research divorce lawyers, asset protection strategies, and ways to claim that I was emotionally unavailable and potentially controlling. In their text exchanges, I discovered that Brandon Hayes, my supposed best friend since college, was also aware of the situation. Not only was he aware, but he had been actively encouraging Rachel to follow her heart and not let societal expectations trap her in an unfulfilling marriage. Brandon, who had been my groomsman, who came to our house for dinner twice a month, who knew about every business challenge and personal struggle I had faced over the past 5 years. The three of them had been meeting regularly, analyzing my behavior, my reactions, my schedule, and my emotional state like I was a problem to be managed, rather than a human being whose life was being systematically dismantled. They had turned my marriage into a group project, with each of them playing a specific role in what they apparently saw as Rachel's liberation story. As I scrolled through months of messages, I realized that our couples therapy sessions had been carefully orchestrated. Rachel had been feeding Dr. Roberts specific narratives about our relationship, painting me as someone who was loving but ultimately incompatible with her evolving spiritual needs. She had been building a case for our divorce before I even knew our marriage was in trouble. The most devastating discovery was a detailed timeline they had created, mapping out how Rachel would gradually distance herself from our shared life while building her new one with David. They had planned everything from the yoga studio investment to the specific language she would use to explain her behavior to family and friends. I was being written out of my own life story, replaced by a more spiritually evolved version of partnership that somehow required my complete absence. By the time dawn broke over Portland, I had printed copies of everything. Every email, every text message, every document that showed the elaborate planning that had gone into betraying me. I organized it all into neat folders, the same methodical approach I used for client presentations, except this time I was preparing to present the evidence of my own destruction. Rachel found me in the office when she woke up, surrounded by papers and printouts. For the first time since this all began, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not guilt, not remorse, but fear of being caught. Fear of losing control of the narrative she had so carefully constructed. "Mike, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice still heavy with sleep but already shifting into defensive mode. I looked up at her. This woman I had loved for 8 years, who had shared my bed, my dreams, my business plans, and my vision of the future. Standing there in her silk pajamas in the doorway of our shared office, she looked like a stranger wearing a familiar face. "I'm preparing for my meeting with Patricia Williams this morning," I said calmly. "Turns out there's a lot more to discuss about property transfers and business partnerships than I originally thought." The color drained from her face as she saw the organized stacks of evidence spread across our desk. Her carefully constructed world, built on lies and manipulation and the assumption that I would never discover the truth, was crumbling in real time. "Mike, I can explain everything," she began. but I held up my hand to stop her. No, Rachel. You've explained enough. You've been explaining for months, actually. To Jessica, to Brandon, to David, to Dr. Roberts. The only person you haven't explained anything to is me. And now, I understand why. As I gathered the papers and prepared to leave for my appointment with Patricia, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Clarity. For the first time since Rachel had started her spiritual journey, I could see the situation exactly as it was, without the fog of gaslighting and manipulation that had been clouding my judgment. She called out my name as I reached the front door, her voice breaking with what sounded like genuine emotion for the first time in our conversation. But I knew now that even her tears, even her apparent remorse, was likely part of a script she had rehearsed with her conspirators. I had built a successful business by understanding market dynamics, competitive landscapes, and strategic positioning. Now, I was going to apply those same skills to dismantling the elaborate game that had been played at my expense. The difference was that this time, I wasn't trying to win clients or market share. I was fighting for my life. Patricia Williams sat across from me in her downtown office, her expression growing more serious as I laid out the evidence I had gathered. The panoramic view of Portland's skyline through her floor-to-ceiling windows seemed almost mocking in its beauty, a stark contrast to the ugliness of what we were discussing. "Mike, this is more extensive than I initially thought," she said, adjusting her reading glasses as she reviewed the printed emails and text messages. "What you're showing me suggests a coordinated effort to defraud you of marital assets while building a case for divorce that would leave you at a significant disadvantage." I watched her flip through page after page of documentation, each one representing another layer of betrayal I had uncovered. The yoga studio investment was just the beginning. Rachel had been systematically moving money from our joint accounts into investments and purchases that would benefit her new life with David, while creating a paper trail that made me look financially controlling and potentially abusive. "The most concerning aspect," Patricia continued, "is how they've been using your own business success against you. Look at these messages between Rachel and Jessica about your work schedule, your dedication to the company, your travel requirements. They're building a narrative that you're emotionally absent and prioritizing career over marriage." She was right. In the text exchanges between Rachel and Jessica, my commitment to growing Thompson & Associates had been reframed as neglect and abandonment. Every late night I had spent working on client proposals, every business trip I had taken to secure new accounts, every moment I had dedicated to building our financial future, was being twisted into evidence of my failure as a husband. "What's particularly sophisticated about this approach," Patricia explained, "is how they've been documenting your reactions to Rachel's increasingly distant behavior. When you tried to plan romantic evenings or suggested activities together, they framed your efforts as controlling or desperate. When you gave her space to pursue her interests, they characterized it as disengagement and lack of caring." I thought back to the countless times over the past 6 months when I had felt like I couldn't win with Rachel. Every gesture was wrong. Every response was inadequate. Every attempt to connect was either too much or too little. Now I understood why. I hadn't been trying to please my wife. I had been unknowingly performing for an audience that was grading my every move and finding me wanting. "Dr. Roberts, the couple's therapist," I said. "How much did he know about what was really happening?" Patricia shook her head grimly. "Based on these messages, it appears Rachel was feeding him a very specific version of events. She was essentially using professional therapy as a way to legitimize her complaints about your marriage, while getting expert validation for her decision to leave." The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope and cruelty. Rachel had turned our attempts at marriage counseling into a weapon against me, using my own willingness to work on our relationship as evidence that there were serious problems that needed fixing. Dr. Roberts had been an unwitting accomplice, providing professional credibility to Rachel's manufactured dissatisfaction. "There's something else we need to discuss," Patricia said, her tone becoming even more serious. "The timeline suggests they've been planning this for almost a year. The yoga studio investment, the gradual financial separation, even the timing of when she started couples therapy. This wasn't a sudden decision or an impulsive affair. This was a calculated exit strategy." She was right. Looking at the evidence chronologically, I could see how every major decision over the past year had been part of a larger plan. Rachel's sudden interest in yoga hadn't been about personal growth. It had been about meeting David and assessing him as a potential replacement. Her insistence on couples therapy hadn't been about saving our marriage. It had been about building a professional record of our supposed incompatibility. Even seemingly innocent changes in our daily routine had been strategic. Rachel's new preference for separate bank accounts for personal expenses had allowed her to fund her relationship with David without my knowledge. Her decision to take over more of the household financial management had given her access to information about our assets and income that she could share with David and Jessica as they planned their future together. My phone buzzed with a text message from Brandon, my supposed best friend who I now knew was actively working against me. "Hey man, haven't seen you in a while. Want to grab drinks tonight? I feel like we need to catch up." I showed the message to Patricia, who frowned as she read it. "Given what you've discovered about his involvement, this invitation could be an attempt to gauge your state of mind or gather information about your next moves." The thought that Brandon might be conducting reconnaissance for Rachel made me feel physically ill. This was someone who had been present for every major milestone in my adult life. He had helped me move into my first apartment, celebrated when I landed my first major client, been there when my father passed away 3 years ago. The idea that he had been reporting back to Rachel about my emotional state, my business concerns, my personal struggles felt like a violation that went beyond even her affair. "What do you recommend as our next steps?" I asked Patricia, grateful to have someone I could trust helping me navigate this nightmare. "First, we need to protect your business assets immediately. If they've been planning this for a year, they've likely identified ways to claim that marital funds were used inappropriately for business purposes. We need to document the legitimate business expenses and separate them clearly from any personal expenditures." She pulled out a legal pad and began making notes as she spoke. "Second, we need to preserve all the evidence you've gathered and potentially find more. If Rachel realizes you've discovered their communications, she'll likely try to destroy evidence or create new documentation that supports her version of events." The idea that there might be even more evidence to find was both encouraging and terrifying. How deep did this conspiracy go? How many other people in our shared social circle were aware of what was happening? "Third," Patricia continued, "we need to be strategic about how and when you confront Rachel directly. Right now, she doesn't know the full extent of what you've discovered. That gives us an advantage in terms of protecting your interests and potentially gathering additional information." As we discussed strategy, I found myself thinking about my mother, Margaret, who was living in an assisted living facility in Lake Oswego. At 78, she had been struggling with early-stage dementia, and her care was expensive. Rachel had always been supportive of the financial commitment required for Mom's care, even encouraging me to choose the more expensive facility because of their specialized memory care program. Now I wondered if Rachel's apparent generosity had been part of her long-term planning. In the divorce proceedings she was obviously anticipating, my financial obligation to my mother could be used to demonstrate the ongoing expenses that would limit my ability to pay significant alimony or split assets equally. "Patricia, there's something else I need to mention. My mother's care situation. Could they be planning to use that against me somehow?" She nodded grimly. "Unfortunately, yes. Elder care responsibilities can be factored into divorce settlements. If they can demonstrate that your mother's care will be an ongoing financial burden, it could affect how marital assets are divided." The realization that even my mother's illness might be part of their calculation was devastating. I thought about all the times Rachel had visited Mom with me, bringing her favorite cookies, sitting patiently through confused conversations, helping her with her photo albums. Had any of that affection been genuine, or had she been calculating the financial implications even then? My phone rang, interrupting my dark thoughts. It was Rachel, calling from the gallery where she worked. I looked at Patricia, who nodded encouragingly. "Answer it," she mouthed. "Act normal." "Hi, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "How's your day going?" "Oh, it's been crazy busy," Rachel replied, her voice carrying that false brightness I was now learning to recognize. "Listen, I wanted to check with you about something. Jessica invited us to dinner tomorrow night at that new restaurant in Alberta. I know it's short notice, but I thought it might be nice for us to get out together." I looked at Patricia, who was taking notes as she listened to my side of the conversation. Jessica wanting to have dinner with both of us now seemed less like a friendly social invitation and more like an opportunity to observe our interaction and assess how much I might suspect. That sounds nice, I replied. Will it just be the three of us? Actually, Brandon mentioned he might join us too. You know how he loves trying new restaurants. And I thought we could invite David as well, since you two haven't really had a chance to get to know each other. The audacity was stunning. Rachel was suggesting I have dinner with her affair partner, presenting it as a casual social gathering where I could meet the man who was planning to replace me in her life. It was psychological manipulation on a level that seemed almost impossible to comprehend. David, from your yoga class? I asked, maintaining my innocent tone while Patricia raised her eyebrows across the desk. Yes, he's become such a good friend to both of us, really. I think you'd like him if you gave him a chance. He has some interesting perspectives on work-life balance that might be helpful for you. Work-life balance. The phrase Rachel had been using more frequently in recent months, always in the context of suggesting that I was too focused on my career and not present enough in our relationship. Now I understood that David had been coaching her on these talking points, helping her build the case for why I was inadequate as a partner. Sure, that sounds fine, I said. Text me the details, and I'll put it in my calendar. After I hung up, Patricia and I sat in silence for a moment. The plan was becoming clearer with each interaction. They weren't just planning to end my marriage. They were planning to make me complicit in my own destruction, to have me smile and make polite conversation with the man who was stealing my wife while my supposed best friends watched and evaluated my performance. This dinner could actually work in our favor, Patricia said thoughtfully. If you can handle the emotional difficulty of it, observing their group dynamics might give us additional insight into their plans and timeline. The thought of sitting across a dinner table from David making small talk while knowing what I knew seemed almost impossible. But Patricia was right. This was an opportunity to gather information while they still believed I was unaware of their conspiracy. What should I be looking for? I asked. Body language between Rachel and David, obviously. But also pay attention to how Jessica and Brandon interact with both of them. Look for signs of inside jokes, shared knowledge, or conversations that seem rehearsed. They've been planning this for so long that they might have trouble maintaining completely natural behavior. As I prepared to leave Patricia's office, she handed me a business card for a private investigator she recommended. Given the scope of what you've uncovered, it might be worth having professional help documenting any additional evidence. This level of coordination suggests there could be financial assets or plans you haven't discovered yet. Walking back to my car, I felt like I was seeing Portland with completely different eyes. The familiar streets where Rachel and I had walked hand in hand seemed foreign now. The restaurants where we had celebrated anniversaries and business successes felt like stages where I had unknowingly performed in a play written by someone else. I drove past the yoga studio where David taught, a converted warehouse space in Hawthorne with large windows and motivational quotes painted on the brick exterior. Through the windows, I could see people in various poses, stretching and breathing, and presumably finding the inner peace that had eluded me for months. The irony wasn't lost on me that the place where my wife had found her spiritual awakening was also where she had planned my spiritual destruction. That evening, I sat in our living room pretending to watch television while Rachel moved around the house with an energy that seemed almost manic. She was cleaning obsessively, rearranging furniture, and updating what she called her meditation space with new crystals and candles. The activity felt performative, as if she were trying to demonstrate her commitment to personal growth and domestic harmony. Mike, I've been thinking about what Dr. Roberts said in our last session, she began, settling onto the couch beside me with the careful distance she had been maintaining for weeks, about the importance of individual growth within a partnership. Dr. Roberts had indeed emphasized individual growth, but his intention had been to help us develop as separate people who chose to be together, not as preparation for Rachel to develop into someone who chose to be with someone else entirely. What specifically have you been thinking about? I asked, genuinely curious to hear how she would frame her betrayal in therapeutic language. I think I've been afraid to be completely honest about my needs and desires because I didn't want to hurt you, she said, her voice taking on the measured tone she used when she was repeating something she had practiced. But Dr. Roberts helped me understand that protecting someone from truth isn't actually loving. It's controlling. The psychological jujitsu was masterful. Rachel was reframing her deception and affair as honesty, and her lies as a form of love. She was preparing to tell me about David, but she was doing it in a way that made her betrayal sound like personal growth, and my potential hurt feelings sound like an attempt to control her self-actualization. "I appreciate you wanting to be more honest," I replied carefully. "What truths have you been protecting me from?" She took a deep breath, and for a moment, I thought she might actually confess everything. Instead, she launched into a carefully prepared speech about feeling spiritually unfulfilled in our marriage, about needing space to explore her authentic self, about wondering if we had gotten married too young before either of us really knew who we were meant to become. It was a beautiful speech, full of psychological terminology and spiritual concepts that made her sound enlightened and self-aware. It was also completely hollow, a performance designed to make me feel like the problem was my inability to support her personal journey, rather than her systematic betrayal of our relationship. "Have you talked to Dr. Roberts about these feelings?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Yes, and he's been very helpful in helping me understand that these doubts are normal and healthy. He thinks it would be beneficial for us to take some time to explore what we each want from life individually before we can determine if we want the same things together." There it was. The therapeutic justification for a trial separation that would allow Rachel to openly pursue her relationship with David, while keeping me as a backup option in case things didn't work out. Dr. Roberts, with his emphasis on individual growth and exploration, had unknowingly provided the perfect framework for Rachel's exit strategy. "What would that look like practically?" I asked, continuing to play the role of the confused but cooperative husband. "Well, maybe I could stay with Jessica for a few weeks while we both do some individual therapy and reflection, just to get some perspective on what we both want moving forward." Jessica's apartment, where Rachel would have unlimited privacy, to continue her relationship with David, while maintaining the fiction that this was about personal growth, rather than infidelity. The plan was elegant in its deception and devastating in its coldness. As Rachel continued explaining her vision for our conscious uncoupling and intentional separation, I found myself marveling at the elaborate psychological framework they had constructed to justify what was, fundamentally, a simple case of adultery and abandonment. They had taken basic human betrayal and dressed it up in therapeutic language until it sounded like enlightenment. My phone buzzed with a text from the private investigator Patricia had recommended. "Available to meet tomorrow afternoon to discuss your situation. My initial consultation is confidential and free of charge." Looking at Rachel, who was now describing how much she loved me and wanted what was best for both of us, I realized that I was about to enter a phase of this nightmare that would require every bit of strength and strategic thinking I possessed. Tomorrow night's dinner would be my first real test of whether I could maintain my facade while gathering the information I needed to protect myself. But tonight, I had to sleep next to the woman who had been systematically destroying my life, while speaking to me in the language of love and spiritual growth. As Rachel settled into bed beside me, already reaching for her phone to text with the people who were helping her plan my destruction, I stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine what my life might look like on the other side of this betrayal. For the first time in months, the uncertainty didn't terrify me. Instead, it felt like possibility. The private investigator's office was tucked away in a nondescript building in southeast Portland, far from the polished downtown high-rises where Patricia Williams conducted her legal practice. Sarah Chen, no relation to David despite the shared surname, was a former police detective who specialized in matrimonial investigations. Her office walls were lined with certificates and commendations. But what impressed me most was the quiet confidence in her voice when she explained how these cases typically unfolded. "The level of coordination you're describing is more common than you might think," she said, reviewing the evidence I had brought. "What we're seeing here is what I call a soft landing strategy. They're not just planning to end your marriage. They're planning to do it in a way that minimizes their guilt and maximizes their financial and social advantages." Sarah spread out timeline charts and relationship maps as she spoke, turning my personal nightmare into a professional case study. It was both comforting and disturbing to see my situation analyzed with such clinical detachment. "The yoga studio investment is particularly telling," she continued. "It creates a legitimate reason for Rachel and David to spend time together, exchange money, and plan for the future. When their relationship becomes public, they can claim it developed naturally from their business partnership, rather than acknowledging the affair. She pointed to specific dates on the timeline where Rachel's behavior had shifted. Notice how the couple's therapy started right after the first yoga studio meetings. That's not coincidence. She needed professional validation for her complaints about your marriage before she could justify leaving. I thought about Dr. Roberts and his earnest attempts to help us communicate better. He had been manipulated just as thoroughly as I had fed carefully crafted information designed to make him believe our marriage was fundamentally troubled rather than systematically sabotaged. What about Brandon and Jessica's involvement? I asked. How unusual is it to have friends actively participating in something like this? Sarah's expression darkened. That's actually the most concerning aspect of your situation. Individual affairs are one thing, but when you have a coordinated group working to isolate someone and rewrite their reality, that crosses into psychological abuse territory. They've essentially been gaslighting you for months. The term gaslighting had become popular recently, but I had never fully understood its implications until Sarah explained how it worked in practice. Every time I had felt confused about Rachel's behavior, every moment when I had questioned my own perceptions or wondered if I was being too sensitive or demanding, I had been experiencing the intended effect of a coordinated campaign to make me doubt my own reality. They've been particularly clever about using your strengths against you, Sarah observed. Your dedication to your business, your loyalty to friends, your commitment to making your marriage work. They've taken every positive quality you possess and twisted it into evidence of your inadequacy. As she spoke, I realized how completely they had undermined my sense of self over the past year. I had begun to question whether I was too focused on work, too emotionally unavailable, too set in my ways. I had started believing that Rachel's spiritual growth was making her too evolved for our marriage, rather than recognizing it as cover for her affair. I want to be clear about something, Sarah said, leaning forward across her desk. What they've done to you is not just betrayal. It's a form of psychological warfare. The fact that you're sitting here having a rational conversation about evidence and strategy tells me you're stronger than they probably anticipated. Her words were both validating and terrifying. If I was stronger than they had anticipated, what had they been prepared to do if I had broken down completely under their manipulation? How far were they willing to go to achieve their goals? What's our next step? I asked, ready to move from understanding the situation to taking action. Tonight's dinner is crucial, Sarah replied. I want you to wear a recording device. Oregon is a one-party consent state, which means you can legally record conversations you're part of without the other party's knowledge. We need to document their behavior and statements while they still think you're unaware of their plans. The thought of wearing a wire to dinner with my wife and supposed friends felt surreal, like something from a crime drama rather than my actual life. But Sarah was right that we needed more evidence, especially if their planning was as sophisticated as it appeared. What should I be trying to get them to say? I asked. Don't push too hard for specific admissions, she warned. Just be yourself, ask normal questions, and let them talk. People who are hiding something often reveal more than they intend when they're trying to appear normal. The key is to document their coordinated behavior and any slips they make about their real timeline or intentions. Sarah fitted me with a small recording device that was virtually undetectable once properly positioned. She also gave me a list of subtle signals I could use if the conversation took a turn that made me uncomfortable, or if I felt they were becoming suspicious. As I drove to the restaurant in Alberta, I felt like I was preparing for a performance that would determine the rest of my life. Everything depended on my ability to maintain the facade of the confused but cooperative husband, while gathering evidence that could protect me in the inevitable divorce proceedings. The restaurant Rachel had chosen was trendy and loud, with exposed brick walls and an open kitchen that created a constant buzz of activity. It was the perfect setting for a private conversation to go unnoticed. But it also meant our table would be surrounded by the kind of urban professionals who made up our social circle in Portland. Rachel was already seated when I arrived, and I was struck by how different she looked. Over the past year, her appearance had gradually shifted from the classic, understated style I had always admired to something more bohemian and deliberately artistic. Tonight, she was wearing a flowing dress with jewelry I didn't recognize, and her hair was arranged in a way that seemed designed to catch attention. "You look beautiful," I said as I sat down, meaning it despite everything I now knew. Whatever else Rachel had become, she was still physically attractive, and I could understand how David might have been drawn to her. "Thank you," she replied, with a smile that seemed genuine for the first time in weeks. "I've been feeling more like myself lately, more authentic." Authentic, another word from her new vocabulary that she used to describe her betrayal in positive terms. I wondered if David had taught her to frame their affair as authenticity, or if she had developed that rationalization on her own. Jessica arrived next, embracing both of us with the excessive enthusiasm that had always characterized her personality. She was wearing an outfit that seemed designed to complement Rachel's new style, and I noticed they were both wearing similar bracelets that I hadn't seen before. "Mike, you look stressed," Jessica said with concern that might have seemed genuine if I hadn't read her text messages. "Are you getting enough sleep? You know how important rest is for emotional regulation." Emotional regulation. More therapeutic. Language designed to suggest that any negative reaction I might have to their behavior was a personal failing rather than a reasonable response to betrayal. I was beginning to understand how thoroughly they had all internalized this framework of psychological manipulation. Brandon arrived 20 minutes late, full of apologies about traffic and work deadlines that seemed calculated to establish his importance and busy schedule. He embraced me with the same brotherly affection he had shown for years, and for a moment I almost forgot that he was part of the conspiracy against me. "Sorry I'm running behind, man," he said, settling into his chair. "You know how it is with client demands. Sometimes I wonder how you manage to balance everything with Thompson & Associates growing so fast." The comment seemed innocent, but I recognized it now as part of their ongoing narrative about my work-life balance issues. Brandon was establishing the theme that would allow the conversation to naturally turn toward my supposed shortcomings as a husband. "Actually, things have been pretty manageable lately," I replied. "I've been trying to take Rachel's advice about being more present at home." I watched their faces carefully as I said this, looking for any signs of surprise or discomfort. Jessica and Brandon exchanged a brief glance that confirmed they had been expecting me to complain about work stress rather than credit Rachel with helping me achieve better balance. David arrived last, and I got my first close look at the man who had been systematically replacing me in my wife's life. He was tall and lean with the kind of effortless physical confidence that came from years of yoga practice. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, and his smile seemed genuinely warm as Rachel introduced us. "Mike, I've heard so much about you," he said, settling into the seat directly across from me. "Rachel talks about your business success all the time. It's really impressive what you've built." The compliment felt sincere, which somehow made it worse. David wasn't a cartoon villain. He was an intelligent, charismatic man who had systematically seduced my wife while helping her justify abandoning our marriage. His ability to seem genuinely likable made the betrayal feel more personal rather than less. As we ordered drinks and appetizers, I observed the group dynamics that Sarah had told me to watch for. Rachel and David didn't sit next to each other, but they maintained constant eye contact across the table. When David spoke, Rachel's body language became more animated, and when she laughed at his jokes, it was with the kind of genuine delight I hadn't seen directed toward me in months. Jessica and Brandon both deferred to David in subtle ways, asking his opinion on menu items and restaurant recommendations as if he were the natural leader of the group. It was clear that he had already been accepted as Rachel's new partner in everything but official designation. "So, David, Rachel tells me you're expanding your yoga practice," I said, giving him an opening to discuss the business investment that I now knew included my money. "Yes, it's been an incredible journey," he replied with enthusiasm. "The wellness industry in Portland is really growing, and there's such a demand for authentic spiritual practices. Rachel has been incredibly helpful with the business planning aspects." Authentic spiritual practices. The same language Rachel had been using to describe her personal growth. I was beginning to understand that David wasn't just her affair partner, he was her spiritual guru, providing the philosophical framework she needed to justify abandoning our marriage. "What kind of business planning?" I asked, maintaining my innocent curiosity, while the recording device captured every word. "Oh, market research, financial projections, legal structures," David said vaguely. Rachel's experience with gallery management has been invaluable. She understands the creative business landscape in ways that most people don't. Jessica jumped in to change the subject before I could ask more specific questions. David, tell Mike about that amazing retreat you're planning. It sounds like exactly what busy professionals need to reconnect with their authentic selves. The retreat was apparently a weekend workshop that David was organizing for couples who wanted to explore their relationship dynamics in a supportive spiritual environment. As he described it, I realized this was likely where Rachel planned to make our separation public, framing it as a mutual decision reached through guided spiritual exploration rather than acknowledging her affair. It sounds like something Rachel and I should consider, I said, watching their reactions carefully. We've been working so hard on our communication in therapy. The brief moment of panic that flashed across Jessica's face told me everything I needed to know. They hadn't expected me to show interest in attending David's retreat, and they certainly hadn't planned for me to participate in the spiritual awakening that was supposed to justify Rachel leaving me. Well, the retreat is really designed for people who are already pretty advanced in their personal growth journey, David said carefully. It might be more beneficial for you and Rachel to continue with traditional therapy for now. Traditional therapy. The dismissive way he said it made it clear that he considered Dr. Roberts' approach inferior to his own spiritual methods. I was beginning to understand that David wasn't just stealing my wife. He was positioning himself as a superior guide for her personal development. As the evening progressed, I found myself marveling at the elaborate performance they were all maintaining. Every conversation topic had been carefully chosen to reinforce their shared narrative about my limitations as a husband, while showcasing David's wisdom and spiritual advancement. They weren't just having dinner. They were conducting a psychological operation designed to make me complicit in my own replacement. Brandon steered the conversation toward work-life balance, asking pointed questions about my travel schedule and client commitments that were clearly designed to demonstrate how my career priorities were harming my marriage. Jessica shared stories about friends whose relationships had improved after they gave each other space to grow individually, planting seeds for the separation Rachel was planning to propose. David offered insights about the importance of spiritual compatibility in relationships, explaining how couples often grew apart when one partner evolved faster than the other. As he spoke, Rachel nodded along with the kind of rapt attention she used to give my business presentations, and I realized that she had already mentally replaced me with him as her intellectual and spiritual partner. The most disturbing aspect of the evening was how natural it all seemed. If I hadn't discovered their communications and understood their real agenda, I might have genuinely enjoyed the conversation. David was intelligent and articulate. Jessica and Brandon were their usual charming selves, and Rachel seemed happier and more engaged than she had been in months. They had created a complete alternate reality, where their betrayal was actually enlightenment, where my pain was evidence of my spiritual limitations, and where my wife's affair partner was a wise teacher, helping us all evolve into better people. It was psychological manipulation on a scale that seemed almost impossible to comprehend. As we finished dinner and prepared to leave, David suggested we all get together again soon, perhaps for a hiking trip or a visit to his yoga studio. Rachel immediately embraced the idea, and Jessica and Brandon both expressed enthusiasm for spending more time together as a group. "Mike, you should really try one of David's classes," Rachel said as we gathered our coats. "I think it would help with the stress you've been carrying from work." The stress I had been carrying wasn't from work. It was from months of psychological manipulation and gaslighting designed to make me doubt my own perceptions and blame myself for my wife's affair. But in their carefully constructed narrative, my emotional turmoil was just another flaw that David's spiritual guidance could help me overcome. Walking to our separate cars, I felt the weight of the evening's revelations settling over me like a heavy blanket. I had successfully maintained my facade and gathered the evidence Sarah had requested, but the emotional cost of watching my wife perform such an elaborate betrayal was almost overwhelming. As I drove home through Portland's familiar streets, I realized that the hardest part wasn't discovering Rachel's affair, or even uncovering the elaborate conspiracy surrounding it. The hardest part was accepting that the woman I had loved for 8 years had become someone capable of such sophisticated cruelty, someone who could look me in the eye and speak about authenticity, while systematically destroying everything we had built together. Tomorrow, I would meet with Sarah and Patricia to review the recording and plan our next moves. But tonight, I had to go home and share a bed with someone who was no longer my wife in any meaningful sense. Someone who was counting down the days until she could openly be with the man who was already replacing me in every aspect of her life except the legal one. The performance was becoming more difficult to maintain with each passing hour, but I knew that my ability to continue playing the role of the unsuspecting husband was the only advantage I had left in a game where the rules had been rigged against me from the very beginning. 3 weeks after the dinner recording, everything changed in a single afternoon. I had been following Sarah's advice to document Rachel's activities while maintaining my oblivious husband routine. But what happened next accelerated our timeline beyond anything we had planned. I was supposed to be in Seattle for a client presentation, but the meeting had been canceled at the last minute due to their CEO falling ill. Instead of calling Rachel to let her know I was coming home early, I decided to surprise her. It was a decision that would shatter whatever remained of the illusion I had been living under. Our house was quiet when I pulled into the driveway, but Rachel's car was there, along with another vehicle I recognized as David's hybrid sedan. The yoga equipment that had been cluttering our garage was gone, and I noticed several boxes stacked by the side door that I hadn't seen when I left that morning. I entered through the front door as quietly as possible, not wanting to startle them if they were in the middle of a meditation session or yoga practice. The sounds coming from our bedroom made it immediately clear that their activities had nothing to do with spiritual enlightenment and everything to do with the physical relationship I had been pretending not to know about. What I heard next made me freeze in the hallway, my hand gripping the stair railing so tightly my knuckles went white. Rachel was speaking in the breathless, passionate voice she used to reserve for our most intimate moments. But the words coming out of her mouth were like acid poured directly onto my soul. "I can't wait until we don't have to sneak around anymore," she was saying between gasps. "Mike is so clueless. He actually thinks we're working on our marriage. It's almost sad how desperate he is to believe everything is fine." David's response was muffled, but I could make out enough to understand that he was encouraging her to accelerate their timeline. "The sooner you can get him to agree to the separation, the sooner we can be together openly. The yoga studio is ready, the finances are in place, everything is waiting for you to just end it." "I know. But Jessica thinks we should wait until after his mother's birthday next month. She says it will look bad if I leave right before a family celebration. We need people to see this as a mutual decision, not me abandoning him during a difficult time." The casual way they discussed the timing of destroying my life, treating it like a business decision that needed to be coordinated with social events, was more devastating than discovering the affair itself. They weren't just betraying me. They were scheduling my humiliation around their convenience and public image considerations. "Besides," Rachel continued, "Dr. Roberts is making excellent progress convincing Mike that our problems are his fault. A few more sessions and Mike will probably suggest the separation himself. That would be perfect." I backed away from the staircase and quietly left the house, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Sitting in my car in a parking lot several blocks away, I called Sarah with shaking hands. "They're accelerating the timeline," I told her when she answered. "I need to move now before they have a chance to implement whatever they're planning for next month." Sarah listened as I described what I had overheard, her professional calm helping to steady my panic. "This is actually good news, Mike. We have everything we need now. The recording from tonight, combined with the financial evidence and communications we've already gathered, gives us a complete picture of their conspiracy. What do I do about tonight? I can't go back there and pretend everything is normal after what I just heard." "Actually, you can and you will," Sarah said firmly. "This is the most crucial moment in the entire process. You need to give them no indication that anything has changed. Can you handle that?" I thought about Rachel describing me as clueless and desperate, about David and Jessica coordinating the destruction of my marriage like a corporate merger, about Dr. Roberts unknowingly helping them manipulate me into blaming myself for their betrayal. The rage that had been building for weeks finally crystallized into something cold and focused. "Yes," I said, "I can handle it." When I returned home several hours later, Rachel was in the kitchen preparing dinner as if nothing had happened. The boxes I had seen earlier were gone, and there was no sign that David had been there except for a lingering scent of the expensive cologne he wore. "You're home early," Rachel observed, looking up from the vegetables she was chopping. "How did the Seattle meeting go?" "Canceled at the last minute," I replied, marveling at my own ability to maintain a normal tone. Their CEO came down with food poisoning. We rescheduled for next week. Oh, that's too bad. Well, at least we get to have dinner together tonight. I was just thinking about what Dr. Roberts said about the importance of shared rituals in maintaining connection. Shared rituals. She was using therapeutic language to describe the dinner we were about to share while the scent of her affair partner still lingered in our house. The psychological sophistication of her manipulation was both impressive and horrifying. Over dinner, Rachel seemed more relaxed and affectionate than she had been in months. She asked about my day, laughed at my stories about difficult clients, and even suggested we plan a weekend getaway to the coast. It was a performance worthy of an award, made more chilling by the knowledge that every gesture of intimacy was calculated to maintain her deception until she was ready to reveal it. I've been thinking about what you said regarding giving each other more space for individual growth, I said, testing her reaction to the separation idea she was planning to propose. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth, and I saw a flicker of excitement in her eyes before she composed herself. What specifically have you been thinking about? Just that maybe we've been trying too hard to fix something that might not be broken. Just different. Maybe what we need isn't more couples therapy, but some time to figure out who we are as individuals. It was exactly what she wanted to hear, delivered in language that made it sound like my own realization, rather than the conclusion she had been manipulating me toward for months. I watched her struggle to contain her satisfaction as she pretended to consider the idea thoughtfully. That's very mature of you, Mike. I think there might be some wisdom in that approach. Maybe we could talk to Dr. Roberts about what a healthy separation might look like. A healthy separation. More therapeutic language to describe the divorce she was planning while maintaining the fiction that this was about mutual growth rather than her affair with David. The elaborate vocabulary they had constructed to disguise betrayal as enlightenment was both impressive and nauseating. That night, as Rachel slept peacefully beside me, apparently relieved that her manipulation was working so effectively, I stared at the ceiling and planned my counterattack. Tomorrow, I would meet with Patricia and Sarah to finalize our strategy. The time for gathering evidence and maintaining facades was over. The next morning brought a text from Jessica, asking if Rachel and I wanted to join her and some friends for brunch at a trendy spot in the Pearl District. The invitation felt different now that I understood her role in the conspiracy. She wasn't just Rachel's friend trying to be social. She was an active participant in my psychological destruction, helping to maintain the illusion of normalcy while coordinating my replacement. That sounds nice, I told Rachel as she read the message. I haven't seen Jessica in a while. Are you sure? I know how you feel about spending your Saturday mornings with my friends instead of working or exercising. There it was again, the subtle suggestion that I was antisocial or selfish, that my preferences for how to spend our free time were character flaws rather than normal differences between partners. Every interaction was an opportunity for her to reinforce the narrative that justified her betrayal. I think it would be good for us to do more social things together, I replied. Dr. Roberts was right about the importance of maintaining friendships during relationship transitions. Rachel's smile was radiant, with what I now recognized as relief that her manipulation was working so perfectly. In her mind, I was not only accepting the separation she wanted, but actively participating in creating the conditions that would make it seem like a mutual decision. At brunch, Jessica was particularly attentive to me, asking detailed questions about my work and expressing admiration for my business success. To an outside observer, she might have seemed like a loyal friend concerned about my well-being during a difficult period in my marriage. But I now understood that she was gathering intelligence, assessing my emotional state, and readiness for the separation Rachel was planning to propose. Mike, you seem different lately, Jessica observed over her mimosa. More relaxed somehow, like you're not carrying as much stress. The comment was carefully designed to suggest that my marriage to Rachel was the source of my stress, and that contemplating separation was already improving my mental health. It was psychological manipulation disguised as friendly observation, delivered with the kind of caring tone that made it seem supportive rather than manipulative. I think I'm just learning to accept that some things are outside my control, I replied, giving her the response she was fishing for. Fighting against reality is exhausting. Jessica and Rachel exchanged a quick glance that confirmed they interpreted my words as acceptance of our marriage's inevitable end. They were so focused on managing my reactions according to their script that they missed the deeper meaning of what I was saying. Some things were indeed outside my control. Rachel's decision to have an affair, her choice to involve our friends in betraying me, her systematic campaign to gaslight me into believing I was the problem in our marriage. But my response to discovering their conspiracy was entirely within my control, and they had no idea what was coming. As we walked back to our cars after brunch, Rachel linked her arm through mine with the kind of casual affection she hadn't shown in months. To anyone watching, we looked like a happily married couple enjoying a pleasant Saturday with friends. The performance was flawless, which made the betrayal underneath it even more devastating. "Jessica is such a good friend," Rachel said as we drove home. "I don't know what I would do without her support during this difficult time." Support. Another word that meant something completely different in Rachel's vocabulary than it did in mine. Jessica's support involved helping Rachel plan my emotional destruction while maintaining the facade of caring about my well-being. It was friendship weaponized in service of betrayal. That afternoon, I met with Patricia and Sarah in Patricia's conference room to review our final strategy. The evidence we had gathered painted a clear picture of conspiracy, fraud, and psychological abuse that went far beyond a simple extramarital affair. Rachel and her conspirators had created an elaborate plan to destroy my marriage while making me believe it was my fault, all while stealing marital assets to fund their new life together. "It's time to end this charade," Patricia said, reviewing the financial documents that showed how Rachel had been systematically moving money into investments with David. "You have grounds for both divorce and a civil suit for fraud. More importantly, you have the evidence to protect your business assets and secure a favorable settlement." Sarah nodded in agreement. "The psychological manipulation they've subjected you to is well documented. Any judge who reviews this evidence will understand that you've been the victim of a coordinated campaign of abuse, not a failed marriage." As we finalized our plans for Monday's actions, I felt a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with finally being able to stop pretending. The performance I had been maintaining for weeks was becoming increasingly difficult, and the strain of living with someone who was actively working to destroy me was taking a psychological toll that I wasn't sure I could sustain much longer. Sunday evening, Rachel suggested we order takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant and watch a movie together. It was the kind of casual domestic intimacy that had characterized the best parts of our relationship, and for a moment I felt a pang of grief for what we had lost. But then I remembered her voice describing me as clueless and desperate, and the sentiment hardened into resolve. Tomorrow, everything would change. The woman sitting beside me on our couch, pretending to enjoy our shared evening while secretly planning my destruction, would discover that her carefully orchestrated campaign had failed. The performance that had consumed my life for weeks was finally coming to an end, and the real Michael Thompson was about to make his debut. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made Portland beautiful. I woke up before my alarm, feeling calmer than I had in months. Today was the day everything would finally be honest. Rachel was still sleeping when I quietly gathered my essentials and loaded them into my car. I had spent the weekend secretly packing only what I needed most, leaving everything else for the lawyers to sort out later. My plan was simple: serve the divorce papers, implement the asset protection measures Patricia had arranged, and finally stop pretending. At exactly 9 a.m., I walked into Dr. Roberts' office for what Rachel believed was another couples therapy session. She was already there, sitting in her usual chair with the serene expression she had perfected over months of deception. Dr. Roberts greeted us both warmly, completely unaware that this session would be unlike any other. "Before we begin today," I said, reaching into my briefcase, "I have something important to share with both of you." I handed Rachel the divorce papers first, watching her face transform from confusion to shock to something approaching panic as she read the first page. The comprehensive evidence packet went to Dr. Roberts, whose expression shifted from professional concern to genuine alarm as he realized how thoroughly he had been manipulated. "Mike, what is this?" Rachel's voice had lost all trace of the calm, spiritual tone she had been using for months. "It's honesty," I replied. "Something that's been missing from our relationship for quite some time." Dr. Roberts was flipping through printouts of text messages and emails, his face growing pale as he read conversations between Rachel and Jessica, discussing how to manipulate him into supporting their narrative. "Mrs. Thompson, did you deliberately provide false information about your marriage during our sessions?" Rachel's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. Gone was the enlightened woman seeking spiritual growth. In her place sat someone scrambling to control a situation that had spiraled beyond her management. "Mike, you don't understand. David and I, we never meant for it to happen this way. We were trying to find the kindest approach to transition our relationship without hurting you. By stealing marital assets to fund your yoga studio investment? By coordinating with Jessica and Brandon to gaslight me for months? By using couples therapy as a weapon against me?" Each question hit like a physical blow. Rachel's responses became increasingly desperate, cycling through denial, justification, and finally a kind of manic pleading that bore no resemblance to the composed woman who had been systematically destroying my life. "Dr. Roberts can explain," she said, turning to the therapist who was still processing his own manipulation. "We were working toward a conscious uncoupling, a spiritual separation that would honor what we had built together. But Dr. Roberts was reviewing the evidence that showed how his professional guidance had been weaponized against me. Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to need to suspend our sessions pending a review of these allegations. If what's documented here is accurate, there may be ethical violations that require reporting." Rachel's world was collapsing in real time. The professional support she had counted on was evaporating. The evidence of her conspiracy was undeniable, and the narrative she had so carefully constructed was being systematically dismantled. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Asset protection complete. Business accounts secured. She's locked out of everything as of 10 minutes ago." I showed Rachel the message, watching her realize that her financial safety net had disappeared. The yoga studio investment was made with money transferred illegally from our business accounts. David's expansion plans are now on indefinite hold while my attorneys recover the stolen funds. "You can't do this," she whispered, all pretense finally gone. "We had something beautiful, Mike. What David and I have is real love, real spiritual connection. You're destroying something sacred out of spite." "What you had was an affair funded with my money and justified with therapeutic language," I replied. "What I'm doing is protecting myself from further fraud and psychological abuse." Rachel's phone was buzzing constantly as news of the divorce filing spread through our social circle. Jessica, Brandon, and David were likely all receiving urgent calls from their lawyers by now, as Patricia had simultaneously filed civil suits against each of them for their roles in the conspiracy. "Jessica's been arrested," I continued, checking another message from Patricia. "Financial fraud charges related to her role in helping you hide assets. Brandon's facing a lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty, since he served as an unofficial advisor for business decisions while secretly working against my interests. The woman I had loved for 8 years was disintegrating before my eyes. But I felt nothing except relief that the performance was finally over. The real Rachel, the one capable of such elaborate cruelty and deception, was someone I had never truly known. "Where will I go?" she asked, the question coming out as a broken whisper. My job, my friends, everything was built around our life, together. "You should probably ask David," I suggested. "After all, he's been planning your new life together for almost a year. I'm sure he's prepared for this contingency." But we both knew that David's commitment had been predicated on access to my financial resources and social connections. Without those advantages, Rachel's spiritual awakening might seem considerably less attractive to her enlightened partner. As I stood to leave Dr. Roberts' office, Rachel grabbed my arm with desperate strength. "Mike, please. We can work through this." The marriage counseling was helping. Dr. Roberts can tell you how much progress we were making. I looked down at her hand on my arm, remembering all the times she had touched me with deception while planning my destruction. "Rachel, you called another man's name during our most intimate moments. You used our shared therapy sessions to build a case against me. You stole money from our business to fund your affair partner's expansion plans. There is no working through betrayal this comprehensive." Walking out into the Portland morning, I felt lighter than I had in months. My phone was buzzing with messages from people who had just learned about the divorce, most expressing shock and offering support. Some, I knew, were genuinely surprised. Others were probably frantically deleting text messages and trying to distance themselves from the conspiracy they had enabled. The process of rebuilding my life would take time, but for the first time in almost a year, I knew exactly where I stood. No more gaslighting, no more manipulation disguised as spiritual growth, no more wondering if my perceptions were accurate, or if I was somehow failing as a husband. My mother's assisted living facility was my first stop after the lawyer's office. I wanted to tell her about the divorce in person, before she heard about it from someone else. At 78, with her memory becoming increasingly unreliable, she deserved to hear the truth from me, rather than a confused version filtered through our social circle. I always thought Rachel seemed like she was performing something, Mom said after I explained the situation. Like she was trying too hard to be the person she thought you wanted, instead of just being herself. It was a remarkably astute observation from someone whose cognitive function was supposed to be declining. Maybe the performance had been more obvious than I realized, and my willingness to believe in Rachel's authenticity had blinded me to what others could see clearly. 3 months later, Thompson & Associates had not only survived the upheaval, but grown stronger. Without the constant stress of navigating Rachel's psychological manipulation, my work had improved dramatically. New clients were attracted to our reputation for integrity and strategic thinking, qualities that had been tested and proven during the most difficult period of my professional life. Rachel's spiritual awakening had ended as abruptly as it began, once the financial realities of her situation became clear. David's yoga studio had closed within weeks of losing the investment funds, and their enlightened partnership had dissolved into a series of bitter recriminations that played out very publicly on social media. Jessica was serving 18 months for financial fraud, while Brandon had settled his civil case for a sum that would impact his finances for years to come. Dr. Roberts had undergone professional retraining on recognizing manipulation in therapy settings and had become something of an expert on psychological abuse disguised as relationship issues. As for me, I was learning to trust my own perceptions again, to value honesty over harmony, and to understand that authentic love doesn't require elaborate justifications or therapeutic frameworks. It simply exists, honestly and openly, without the need for conspiracy or deception. The woman who had called another man's name during our intimate moments had taught me something valuable about the difference between performance and authenticity. She had also learned something about the consequences of mistaking manipulation for enlightenment. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is simply tell the truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.